terrestrial too.
But, I mean,
Is it recording? It's recording.
We're gonna start.
Alright.
Do we want to do a check-in?
Yeah, I'm Oscar.
I'm Courtney.
Jack.
Kayla.
Allie.
Jack.
And we're starting with the crashing videos.
Cool.
Is that how you say his name?
Caution.
Caution.
No, actually, you might quote me on that. I don't think that's what it is.
We can Google it.
Yeah, we can.
And then up to the pronounce button.
I thought this was really interesting for me. I think I talked a little bit about it, but the ideas he talks about and like the difference he like made between language learning and acquisition is really powerful because I'm like trying to learn Spanish right now, and I'm definitely in a classroom where it's more focused on learning and not acquisition, and now I'm frustrated.
Yeah,
Mhm.
totally.
I mean, that's how I feel like a lot of the classrooms are. Especially like the 101 class. I mean, I don't think you're not in 101.
I'm in 104, so.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the 100 level classes are just like,
Yeah.
just like they're there. But like, I kind of talked about that, and I think you also mentioned that too, about how like, yeah, I mean like, acquisition and stuff is like kind of like the subconscious way of like, you know, like you're getting things thrown at you all the time, but you're not really paying attention to it. But like, what I talked about, and like I also noticed that you talked about that too, it was someone about how like, really, if it's not your first language, like you do need like learning blocks.
Yeah.
Like you need something thrown at you. So that's why maybe that's why I feel like it's very like, unless they're completely doing you dirty and you're paying so much money for not in anything like that. But like, yeah, like they need to kind of give you just a base, and then after a while they start just like throwing things at you, you know.
So you're saying that base should be given with like the learning rather than the acquisition?
Well, I mean, it's like, think about it like this. If you're thrown into like the most, like a little farm village in Mexico where everyone speaks Spanish, you know no Spanish, are you really going, especially like at our ages, are you really going to pick up Spanish as well as you would if you knew some of it, you know? Like some, like, you know, like when we're little kids and stuff, like, you know, we're built to just, you know, without any learning blocks, just acquire it. Like, it's how we're supposed to do it. Now that we're older, it's a lot harder to do that. So I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. Like, you need, at least at our certain ages, maybe I think you do need like like at least a little block or something, and then you can start learning.
For me right now, I guess like the structure of my Spanish class is like so different than when I was in like high school Spanish, because I felt like high school Spanish, it engaged you more with vocabulary and practice. And this seems more like we just move from one grammar rule to the next grammar rule every week, and I don't think I'm actually like internalizing the language as much as I'm just like, okay, now I know some grammar stuff, I'll forget in a year if I don't use it.
Yeah, totally.
So I talked about this for set 3, which was C and D, and what you D, Oscar?
That was B.
Jack, you were D?
I was D.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it was talking about the monitor hypothesis, and I'm just going to jump ahead, but basically the monitor hypothesis is when it differentiates language acquisition from learning. So basically, it's whether you're concentrating on the meaning of what you're saying or the grammar and like the kind of classroom etiquette of what you're saying. And so that reminds me of like what you guys were saying, and just when I was in Spanish and I'd have a test, like I'd memorize and practice, and I do really great on the test, but I don't know anything now. So like that doesn't really serve me, you know, like I did great in the class, but you kind of need to promote meaning and accuracy, not just like memorizing and grammar stuff and learning language learning.
Yeah, and when I read through that part, it made me think of like when I learned German in high school, and I guess last year a little. But I thought about that like with oral exams or something that you're just really like not paying attention to what's being asked, but you're just like remembering back to like dialogues and like remembering the format. But when I went to Germany after junior year of high school, there were like a couple times where I was like in public and I needed to like order something from a food stand or like do something like that where I had to interact contextual wise, but I was still kind of monitoring myself and trying to think of the dialogues. So like I wonder if like because of the way you basically learn language in high school, like if you can even like try to do just like the regular output, you know, like talking in your language without monitoring yourself, you know. Because like I couldn't have had a normal conversation. I had to use dialogue. I couldn't say anything else, basically, you know. Seems like you kind of get stuck in that set pretty harsh, unless you like become fluent, you know.
Did you feel like, but like the classroom experiences that you had, helped you once you were actually in that environment, correct?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
They helped with like the stuff where like I knew like how to order something or how to ask for something and such like that, but I never had a conversation.
So did you concentrate more on meaning or accuracy when you were like talking to people? What were you like thinking about?
On accuracy, like it was also kind of like a not wanting to be embarrassed type thing. That was kind of a big part.
Your affect was up?
Affect, yeah.
Yeah, the affect.
Yeah, like I get that because it's like you kind of know what you want to say, you just don't want to. Honestly, for me, like speaking, like because like French is the one I'm trying to learn right now. So like, but from like I feel like from like my pointy point to like from my pointy point from my brain to like your ear, like I feel like a lot of slips can happen, and I'm just always like terrified. And, yeah.
Especially with the pronunciation too.
Yeah.
Like, cause I learned it in ELL 432 that there are some like phonemes and like the pronunciation. Like there are some consonants and vowels that are unique to the language, and like I don't know, Greek had like 30 something or 40 something ways to like sound the word like letters out, and I was like, huh, and then that's why, and then also like, so that's why it's harder for like older, like as you get older, it's harder to pronounce it, and since it's harder to pronounce it, and yet when we are older, like we get this like sense of ego or like, you know, that we don't want we don't want to make mistakes at that point where I think that also kind of like hinders like us from like learning language and learning new language, because like when you're when you're young, like, and when you're in class, you're like, oh, it's okay to make mistakes, that's why we're learning, right? But like once you get to older age, you're like, you want to be professional, you want to be like grammatically correct and kind of like drilling it in. Like for example, my mom, she always uses like the technical terms, like she works in a medical field, so she's like, she uses like vomit and like urine and everything, like those like gross stuff, and then I'm like, pee, and then she's like, we did not learn it, like she's like, I don't know that word, and I was like, yeah, we call that
Really?
yeah, puke, and then we say those stuff, Mom, and
That's
she was
funny.
like, she's like she was asking me those questions because like her patients were saying those words, but she did not understand, and then she couldn't communicate it because they did not understand those like medical technical terms,
I see.
and I was like, I think that part's also interesting, how in certain, and then there's those language that it is you can only acquire when you're in that certain age group in that time, like the word groovy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's like the 80s word, and then now we don't use it. I think so. Like, where was I going with this? Like, kind of like acquisition is very like, I think there's like a certain time frame for a certain. I don't know where I was going with this, but like, you know, you get that prime time, and I think that's why nowadays like the schools curriculums are very like incorporating like bilingual programs and like second language program into like high school graduation requirements, and also all sorts of that, because when you get older it gets more difficult.
Yeah, I'm actually really glad you brought that up because I was gonna pivot back again. I'm sorry. Pardon me. I'm gonna pivot back to the beginning. Krashen also talks about like when you acquire your language, like your language, when someone makes a mistake, you like know right away, like, oh, this is incorrect, but you can't really tell it. And when you mentioned that, I was actually thinking about that too. It's like groovy and cool and like and like that was like nasty, but like meaning in a good way. You know, it's like we have these meanings for these words that like, for example, our generation, like we know these words, but like when you try to explain it to someone who isn't like our age group, it's like, why can't I explain this? Like, why can't I, you know? It's like you get so like into the meaning, and like I feel like I'm like super lucky because like I learned English at such a young age, so like my brain is wired in both English and Spanish, so like I can just think different things too, and like that. So And for example, I'm in Spanish like 301, just so I can get a Spanish minor and stuff, and like it's like a heritage speaker class, so like it's for people who already speak Spanish, like they're fluent in it. And it's like, I think I didn't show up for like an entire week. I like skipped the class for an entire week,
Yeah.
and I showed up on the test day. And then I was sitting there, and like as I was like reading through the questions and stuff like that, I was like, okay, I wasn't here, so I can't really like answer these questions. But at the same time, what I was doing instead was like, instead of thinking of like the grammar rules, like okay, I know that this is, like I was just speaking it and saying it, and I'm like, okay, why does this not sound correct? Or like, why is this correct? You know, like I was kind of trying to fill in the blanks, and I was like, that's something that I can kind of do in French, but I can't. And it's kind of like, I think about it like in math and stuff. Like in math, you learn all these equations and stuff, and like ways, like the steps to do it, but you can't really do that when you're learning a language. You know, like here it's like, okay, like, oh my god, I haven't been in a math class in such a long time. So I can't even think of an example.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, do you guys know what I'm saying? Like, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, it just kind of becomes like intuitive instead at that point.
And also, like, the difficult part about English is that we have speaking language, and then there's also written language where, so we're more like flexible with grammar when we're speaking English, but like written part is so you can't really write what you speak. Is
Yeah, you have to definitely pick up like a different voice.
And that's why we stress a lot on reading when we're teaching English, because like that's like speaking. That's the I guess correct grammar.
Okay.
I'll bounce back to that, but what you said was interesting too, because I'm curious, and this is more like a question, but the knowledge that you have when you hear something that's wrong and you know it's wrong because it's your native language, like I'm just curious, like when in the acquisition process or how like much of a language should you have acquired where you can do that in a second language, like, or like a third language like French, like do you actually think now you're at the point where you're like, okay, I know that sounds wrong, or you still feel like you're building that?
Yeah, actually, and I was actually just thinking, like this, when I was reading this, it actually brought a lot of these things, like a lot of these questions as well. Like I can't, obviously like I'm not a professional at this, so I can't say like, oh, like, you know, at like 6 years of learning this language. I think, to me, it was just like, as of now, in my classes, like I'm taking like French 301, and I've taken like other higher level French courses and stuff. We're not talking about vocabulary, we're not talking about grammar. We are talking about like strengthening grammar and stuff. It's like, by this point, I feel like everything we should have learned in French, vocabulary and grammar rules, has already been taught to me. Like it's already all there. Right now, it's just like, I think I'm in like, they're pushing like the acquiring phase now, I think, on us. Like now they're like pushing it, because like something that I completely always like just kind of just slips my mind is that in my French class, he will just jump between French and English, and he'll teach us grammar rules, and he'll teach us this, and we'll talk about this, and we'll just be jumping between French and English, and it's like, I'm at that point now where it's just like, I don't have to be like translating everything he's saying in English. Like things are starting to stick, just like things are just starting to just come in, and like I don't have to have that like,
You don't have to think about it in English.
yeah, you don't have that like little translation delay where you're just like, okay, what did he say? Like as it's coming in, it's like, I'm like, my mind is like going through it. And I mean, I also have been at this since 2011, so, and it's like, yeah, and I think it's like just really interesting, like, because I even mentioned, like I talked about like my brain being wired now, and it's just like, you know, like I feel like when I'm doing, like we just had a French test due, and like I was doing the same thing I did in my Spanish class, like okay, things are like things are also starting to sound incorrectly, and like things like that, like, I mean, I don't want to say, that wasn't a good way to say it, but like, I can tell mistakes now when they're not correct, and like French is also just as complicated when it comes to like English when it comes to writing, because like written French has a lot of way different like rules and spoken, and it's like, oh yeah, I know, and it's, I mean, it's really cool, I think, and you just kind of have to get to be at it for a while.
Yeah, you have to be comfortable with it basically, and then you start to feel more confident is what it kind of heard you say.
Yeah, and also disclaimer, when you learn like one romance language, like you can learn them all. Like yeah, like since like Spanish is already in me, like a lot of the things are the exact same. So it's like,
Yeah.
that helps a lot. It helps a lot.
Actually, this is kind of a side note, but we learned about that there's Indo, European That's like the mother language of like a lot of
Oh, yeah.
languages. So that is like Latin, so that's like Spanish, French. It's like the Latin. Some
Yeah.
Italian. Yeah.
There's like romantic language.
Yeah.
And then there's also Anglo-Saxon.
That's where English comes from, is the Germanic.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Germanic language.
They're related.
Actually, English is like at the bottom. Like you think
Yeah.
like, oh, it's at the top, but no, it's at the bottom because it has been created from this
Oh,
like
yeah.
all
all
English.
bunch of stuff. It's like
I remember like watching some video like on how English has like mixed Germanic and Romantic. It was just an interesting video because like the word literature is not used, but it used to be bookcraft and stuff, and like a whole bunch of weird words like that.
I know.
Yeah.
Bookcraft.
Like, you just call it like bookcraft, and you just put these really simple things together.
One thing that you said too that was really interesting, one of the first things you said is that like a lot of times once we get older we kind of become more conscious, or we have like an ego, so we're too embarrassed to try saying things in other languages. And I feel like that's true too. Like I'm definitely still like trying to learn Spanish, but I actually like, come from an area where I hear a lot of people speaking Spanish. So I'm pretty comfortable and confident with like how an accent should sound. And there's times where I know what I want to say to people, but I'm like way too afraid that I will come off like disrespectful or like just silly if I try saying something and I say it wrong. So I've like prevented myself from ever actually like using Spanish in social situations, which is like definitely an affective like filter.
That's like a huge barrier between like getting to learn and like when you were talking about that, I was thinking about it like children can acquire language because they're not being taught and such, they're not learning, but like we learned about the steps that they do it where it's like babbling of course and then like the one word and then two word. And so like I wondered like if like adults didn't have like the need to like keep their pride or something and to not like be wrong, if like living in a situation where you basically have to speak 2 words Spanish and then you get better and better at it, if that like, would work and like stuff like that, because I know that some people who immigrate, from like Mexico and such here don't know any English, and they like when you talk to them like in just like public or something, that's kind of how they have to speak to you is like in a couple words, but they eventually get there. So
Yeah, like when I first moved here, I only learned like phonics. I was on a very low sense.
Yeah.
I learned ABCs and phonics, and I came here. And then so what I did when I went to churches were since I know they were also Korean, but they speak mostly English. So they're like the second generation Koreans. So their parents speak fluent Korean, so they understand it. So what I tried to do to communicate with my friends is that I would use like a lot of English words, like "are you," and then I would insert Korean words, and then kind of like I kind of mix them together.
Yeah.
So like I tried my best to use English as much as I can, and then you like insert Korean words if I don't know, and then if we have like if they don't understand that word, we're like kind of charading at that point.
Yeah.
That really built confidence a lot when you're learning English, and then but also kind of going back, I think the current education system kind of like punishes like mistakes, like because when I went to practicum and like and I was doing reading with kindergartners, I saw how they write, and it's adorable. They write SED for said, and they were like, yeah, that's cool. Then we praise them like, oh, that's like that sounds like you're writing what you're like what you're hearing. That's good job. We're learning. And then but then again, when I went to second grade practicum, they were just like looking at me like kind of like hinting at me like, hey, are you gonna provide me answers at this point? What is right? And they were like so subconscious of like what is right, while I wanted them to be like more free and be like there is no right answer. What you do is right.
Yeah.
That's where I was trying to go with, and I was like, I guess we are so like focused on standards and tests that you have to be right at this like that we're kind of like drilling them on, which kind of ends up in the product of adults not being able to like make mistakes.
Yeah. I think you definitely are right there. Grammar is definitely something that people think that it's a right or a wrong, and they don't really think of it as an ongoing learning process. And so I think that because we focus so much on what people are doing wrong, we don't ever spend enough time focusing on what people are doing right. I've tried doing that too, like I've done some projects where like applying the positives and focusing on what people are doing right and being like, okay, like apply praise when you teach grammar and you might actually be able to create some growth.
That's interesting. Like in language class, you just remember like getting like -1/2, like for tiny mistakes you make in a sentence and such like that.
I was gonna say what you were saying, and also about what you were saying, Allie, about like making mistakes and like when you're learning a language, it's a big difference to like be talking to other people in that language versus just like looking at it, or like hearing videos and listening to videos helps too, and writing it helps, but like talking to people in like a real life context helps, and you're gonna use words that you know. And so it actually reminds me of my dad, because also what you said about being embarrassed about like talking in another language that you're gonna be wrong. He is like, I wouldn't say fluent, but he's really good in Spanish and French, and he would just go up to people. He has no shame, and he doesn't get embarrassed. He would just go up to people and just start like speaking to them in Spanish, and like they would be super confused, and most of the time they might just like walk away, but other times they'd like correct him, and they'd be like annoyed by him, but they'd still like correct him and stuff. And so he'd actually make a lot of friends that way. But also he told me like when I was at work just to like start talking to people in Spanish, and I thought like, I'm not like they're gonna be confused, or like, why is this girl like, she doesn't know what she's saying. But I would talk to my coworkers, and they were super helpful. But sometimes they, like, I was learning like the classroom Spanish, but they knew like, what's the other like kind of Spanish? It's like not classroom, but it's like
more like vernacular-ish kind of.
yeah,
more
like they knew it a different way than what I was
more
being
slang,
taught.
No,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely a thing about learning languages. You need to talk to people, but it's also like when you're an adult, you don't want to be like embarrassed. Which
Yeah, like me and Allie wrote on the part where they're talking about output and stuff, and the interactionist or whatever. I believe. Yeah, I mean, like, I guess if we like go onto that subject about like input versus output, you know, do you just like, Krashen was saying that you just need input, right?
Yeah.
I think you wrote about that. And I mean, how much do we think that's true, and how much do we think one or the other
I
could be
don't
more
know.
important, you know?
I kind of like would disagree, because I know a lot of people who have taken, you know, like Spanish for a really long time, and they can read it and they can write it and like hear somebody saying it to them and understand.
Yeah.
So like yes, they understand the language, but they're way too afraid to actually like communicate, or they get very confused communicating. So I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the thing though. If you understand it, isn't that like in a way enough though?
Yeah, but then
Because like you
have to
know
be able
the
to use it.
language, that's the thing. That's the thing. Like you won't be able to speak it because you need more practice speaking it. But like you know the language, you know.
That's fair.
And like I feel like that kind of has a lot. Like I feel like that's kind of why like a lot of times sign language is really important too. And like I feel like people with disabilities and stuff who just can't speak, like they know what we're saying and they understand it. Their just output is different. So like I don't actually know where I'm going with this, but I kind of get what he's saying about the input being a lot more important. Like obviously you want an output, like it's ideal for you to be able to talk to people and stuff. But like if your brain understands it and your brain knows what's going on, isn't that like the whole goal, kind of in a way?
Yeah,
How
it's true.
How I think about it, like to draw a parallel, and like I guess I just thought about this, but like last time I was writing this, I was thinking like, so the whole point of language is